Are you playing to win or just running out the clock? In sports, the game clock drives every decision. It creates urgency, sharpens focus, and pushes players to perform their best. So what if you treated your life with that same sense of urgency? I've created an exercise to help you do just that. It's called Your Game Clock. Download Your Game Clock today at bill-burke.net/clock. It's free, it's simple, yet transformative, and it could be the first step towards achieving peak performance in the areas of your life that matter the most. Remember, life isn't a practice run. Every second counts, and your time is now. Well, I am so excited to have Kristy Kuhl on the Fortitude Forum today. She's got so much corporate experience, but even more than that, she's got experience helping individuals transform their lives and become the best version of themselves. She's a performance coach to executives, to leaders, and to anybody looking to achieve their best in any area that's important to them. So, Kristy, welcome to the show.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for being here. It is my honor.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right into it. I don't want to delay the meat of the show. I want to get right into it because I know you're up for that. So can you share with the audience, if you would, just a defining moment that tested your mental toughness, either in your personal life or in your professional life? Because this show is all about developing the mental toughness and the mental fortitude we all need to achieve that level of success, however we define that.
Yes, yes. And thank you for jumping right to it. I love to do the same. And I'm all about time and respecting people's time, and they're here for a reason. So we're going to get right to it. For me, a big moment in my life where I had to exercise the greatest mental fortitude and toughness of all time was when I realized that I needed to leave corporate America. So I grew up in a one stoplight town. I was chasing financial freedom and success to the best of my ability. Like many things, I like to take them to the extreme. It's who I am. And I landed in a very disruptive medical device sales space. And I was a leader climbing the ladder for 15 years. And I was addicted to the deal. And then I also realized that my ego and so many other things were tied to this job and also to the paycheck. Most importantly, Bill, I could do what most people couldn't do, which is I could survive and thrive in this environment that most people could last about 12 months in. And that was, to be honest, that was the part that I was really kept me there. And the money. I was making almost $500,000 a year. And I felt internal friction. I always felt restless. And I thought it was like, oh, it's the next deal. It's the next, this has got me. The numbers got me. This person on my team, I need to get better. And it wasn't until I started investing in my own personal development and I went to a Tony Robbins event. Now it's like the third one I've gone to. And this time though, when they say like when the student's ready, the teacher appears. It's
That's
like
right.
the guy was standing in front of me 3 more times saying the same thing, or 3 other times. But this time the student was ready and he said, success without fulfillment is the ultimate failure. And it literally was like, it hit me like a bolt of lightning in my chest. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I try to trust my own instincts, but I have found over time that it's really helpful when somebody validates that. And he validated the things that I was feeling and put words to it. So he said, pull out a piece of paper and write down what makes you feel fulfilled. Well, I have a pre-med undergrad and an MBA, and I literally swear I was Googling fulfillment underneath I have no idea what this even means. What is fulfillment? Like we're supposed to just get out there and work hard and put our head down and not say, right? And so it took me 30 minutes to come up with my list, but I was so happy. I'm like, oh my gosh, you got my list. Okay. And he goes, okay, now, if you're not spending the majority of time in this list, then you're missing out on peace and happiness and joy. This is where it lives. And I was like, oh God, oh gosh. So he said, the fix is really to find a way to make money so you have more time to do these things or make this your job. And my list was being 100% where my feet are, being present for the person in front of me so that I can hear and listen, have my antennas sharp, I'm showing up ready, and I know how to serve you. The helper's high is real for me. It always has been. That was the first thing on my list. Being in nature was the second thing. Rescuing dogs, rehabilitating these mommies and babies. I'd done it a couple times, but I didn't have the capacity to do it. traveling. So I was like, how in the world am I gonna like make this a living? Right? It's kind of funny now when you see that I'm a coach and it's what I get to do. But at that time, 6 years ago, it was like the best and the worst moment of my life because I saw on paper, now I have an answer to how I was feeling. So I was like, oh, yes, this is it. And then I was like, oh, gosh, I have some decisions to make. And
Yes.
no longer is it the boss, the job, the this, the that. It's Kristy Kuhl. And if it's meant to be, it's up to me. So that moment was, and the moments that came after that were the times that I had to exercise the greatest fortitude in my life.
So what did that look like initially? What were some of the early challenges that you faced? Because you said it was the best day and the worst day. I imagine the worst part of it was the initial emotion, and I'm putting words in your mouth, but you tell me, was it fear? And if so, then how did you manage your way through that in those first early moments when you really realized you were sitting in front of Tony Robbins and you really realized, okay, I have to make some big changes, which are scary, and a lot of people are not going to understand them, and maybe I won't even understand them myself.
Hmm.
What did you do right in those beginning times before you actually made some drastic changes?
Yeah, yeah. So I recognize starting to do personal development that those rooms were really helpful for me and that there was people and that that I needed in my circle that I didn't have in my circle. So I stumbled upon Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability. That TED Talk had just gone viral. So when they say like you become the 5 people that you spend the most time with, I realized that I needed better people. Not better, that's a terrible way to say it, but I needed people that were thinking and that would support this and that this wouldn't be a big deal to in my life. And I didn't have them. And that takes time to find those people and cultivate those relationships. And so I replaced that with books and podcasts and TED Talks, and that became my environment. And so as I started to distance myself away from the people that would not understand, would never understand, and when I did say it out loud, they made me question myself. And it wasn't that these are wonderful people. It's just that they didn't understand. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? You got the world in your hand right now. You can go to any company you want. I started to get away from them, and isolation's never a good thing. So I had these books and these YouTubes playing on loop all the time. And sometimes it was like water grounds me. Sometimes it was me and Brene Brown and her video on loop in the bathtub, just getting myself centered to go back out. Right. So I would be lying if I said it was a pretty journey because I was toggling back and forth between these moments of courage and these moments where I was trusting my instincts. And then the world would, my pre programming. And my pre-program was always like, what are people going to think? What are people going to say?
Mhm.
And the advice I always give to people is try to get ahead of that. Like, hey, I'm okay, Bill. I'm okay. I know you're going to be worried about me and you probably don't understand this, but I'd rather we just not talk about it. Like, that's the conversation I should have had with my mom, who's, doesn't understand why I'm going to leave a job like this and what am I going to do? And my only answer is because,
Yeah, right.
right? Like, that's all I had at the time. So you need to find people. You need to trust yourself first and foremost, and you need to find people and resources and plug into the things that make you the best you and when you have the most clarity. So for me, it's working out, it's getting good sleep, it's laughter, it's being around the people that make me feel the most confident and really shrinking down that environment. There was things that I did that I think a lot of people do. Like I thought I still was comparing myself to like, why is she okay in this environment and I'm not? Oh, I need to get better. Oh, maybe I just need a vacation. So it wasn't like I heard this and then the next day I quit my job. Now there's other things when you see how much action I take now. It's like boom, boom. Okay, now I'm in the rhythm. But I was an employee at the time and I had an employee mindset.
Mhm.
So being around the right people and really just putting those boundaries up to protect my thinking, I had to learn the hard way, really, because every time I let them in, I'd kind of would waver and question myself.
You mentioned a couple really important things that jumped out to me in that answer, and one of them was personal development. And I
Mhm.
think that that is so critical, and I don't think people realize how important that is to all of our success. And I don't know where I read it or when I read it. I apologize for not knowing the book, but basically it said that, and this is backed by studies and science, 10 out of 10 people want to be happier, right? And personal development is directly related to happiness, but yet only 1 out of those 10 people actually pursue the personal development needed to be happier. So we all want this thing, but we don't even realize that we've got this power and all these resources at our fingertips to actually move that needle forward. And the other thing that you mentioned is, or alluded to, is the power of our subconscious, and how most of what we do, what we think, what we say, it's all on autopilot from our previous
Mm.
programming. And that can be changed. We have the power within us to actually do something about that if we don't like the direction that we're going. So, talk a little bit, if you would, about those two things specifically, and how you really jumped into reprogramming yourself and getting out of the old mindsets and into the new.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for picking up those 2 things, because they're so critical, and what most people don't fully understand is that you need new information to make new decisions and to elevate your mindset and be around probably a different set of people too. And that's where personal development comes in, because it's people that consume personal development are thinking very similarly to you, but more importantly, or equally as important, you're getting new information. And it's not new information, there's no new information, but it's new to you. So when you hear that, now you have some tools and systems and steps to maybe even take the next step to have the conversation, whatever it is. That's what personal development is. It could be a conversation with somebody who has the answers too. That's personal development, reading a book. So I think it's really important for people to understand that you're always going to make the same decisions unless you're infusing new information. I also think, to take that a step further, I love to talk about the subconscious mind. I think real self awareness is when you start letting other people tell you what it is that you're doing. Because, and I think I put a reel up about this recently. I was talking to a friend about something, and she said, "Did you hear what you like? Do you know what you just said?" And I repeated it back, and she's like, "That's not what you just said." And she repeated, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!" So I think real self awareness is when you can allow somebody else in to have permission to go. That's why coaches are so great, right? Like, well, you see, we can see patterns a lot easier, and it's almost impossible to see the picture frame when you're the pitcher. So
Mhm.
I think that that's critically important. And what's your second question?
Uh, well, I ask you about the subconscious, but also personal development, just in
Yeah.
general, and how important that is. To your point, I think that a lot of people don't want those answers. They don't want to look in the mirror because they're afraid of what they might see. So maybe that's the reason why they shy away from it. But you know, you've experienced it firsthand, and I have as well. You got to get to a point where you just got to say, okay, something needs to change, because I'm less comfortable with the status quo than I am with anything out there in the future that I might have to face in order for me to change and get what I want. So, just your experience with personal development in the short time that you've really been working on it, and then maybe your perspective on how much further you have to go, and the fact that it really never ends. We're never a finished product.
Yeah, we were talking about this before we started rolling and started recording. That, I'm doing the summit that's Success Unleashed, and I'll never be done unleashing. There's always going to be a new level, a next level for me. So I think just understanding that we are all wired for growth, and that's where a lot of happiness comes from, when you see the progression and the growth too. I would love to, I feel like part of my job is to turn the lights on and help you see before you get tired and worn out. Because at the end of the day, usually when people are ready for personal development, it's the moment you realize that wherever you go, you take you with you. Because you think like, oh, I can change this and I can change that, and oh, it was her and it was him, and then you're like, and that's usually the moment that I see that people take full responsibility for their life. And if I can get them to a point where they're taking responsibility earlier, it's like, it's the sky's the limit, as you and I were talking about before too. You can do anything you want, but it's your job. It's nobody else's fault or responsibility.
Yeah, so true. So take me back to when you were in the medical device industry and you were an employee. Tell me about a time where you had a major professional setback, and then how did you go about at that time before you got to where you are now? How did you turn that adversity into an opportunity, or at the very least, something that you could learn from?
A time in corporate where I had a setback.
Yeah, because I've been in that space a little bit, and that is a very fast-moving industry, and there's a lot of moving parts and a lot of things that can go wrong, and usually do.
Yeah, I think the biggest one was when, so I grew up in Ohio. I most of my medical device career was in Wisconsin. So I got picked up by Johnson and Johnson, Ethicon. They trained me in the operating room. Then I moved to Wisconsin, climbed the ranks, And there was a company called Intuitive Surgical that people were scared to go to because you get fired right away, and they made you role play in front of the room. And everybody kept saying, you're built for this company, Kristy. And I would not take the recruiter's calls. I'm like, no freaking way, no way, no way, right? Scared out of my mind. And then finally somebody said, like, what are you doing here? Like, you need to go, like, call that. I know that territory is open. So I call the company, and we have an interview. There's actually two stories here. We have an interview, and it's the first time somebody pushed me that hard. And I think they made me meet them in Chicago at 5:30 in the morning for the interview, and I was 2.5 hours away. And so this person is hitting me like left and right. And it's the first time I'm exposed to any of this, any of these tactics. I'm like, what are they doing to me? I know they're doing something like I want to learn it, but like, oh my gosh, I don't think I'm even going to pass the test. And I remember calling my girlfriend when I left, and she had gotten into the company. And I said, she's like, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm not a beer drinker, nor do I smoke, but like, I feel like I need to pull over and pick up a 40 and a pack of cigarettes. Like, this thing was awful. There's no way. There's no way. And I ended up getting the job. And I was like, oh my gosh. And there was one moment in time where this guy, I don't know what I said. Like, I really want this job. I'm so excited. And he's like, well, did you tell your face that? And I was like, what? Like, he was like catching me off guard. And so I had the best development I've ever had in my life. And I know you know this being a coach, like sometimes you just get underneath the right people. And I went like this in my 20s and
Mhm.
early 30s because these guys, they could see something in me, and they pushed me and they developed me. And I was up for a big promotion, and I needed to move to Chicago from Madison, Wisconsin, and it was a turnaround territory. And I said, man, I don't think I can do this anymore. And he's like, what do you mean? Like, are you getting burnt out? And that was always the sign, right? Because everybody burnt out. And I was like, Christian, I can't do this cold. It's so cold here. Like, it's like -30 in Wisconsin. I'm just not built for this. And he's like, oh, well, where do you want to go? I said, Charlotte, North Carolina. And he goes, oh, okay. No kidding, Bill. They fired the guy in Charlotte the next day. And he's like, okay, well, you got to hit both numbers, and if you do that, then you can relocate there. So I moved to Charlotte, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is where I've wanted to be for 10 years. And the thing that I didn't realize was the culture of the company down here was completely different. Completely, like, I am ready to jump out of my skin. I trust nobody. I'm the way they can. Not only was the part of the country culturally different in the way they communicated and conducted business, but now I'm in the thick of a culture that is 1,000% against my core values. And I'm like, oh my gosh, it was hard for me to function. It was hard for me to perform. And then going, okay, I just moved my husband at the time here. We just changed everything. He's changing jobs, and I can't
Yeah.
do this. Like, this is not for me. And so it was the first time that I had to figure out, like, how do I keep those relationships with the people that got me here? And everybody's expecting me to do big things here. And I can't even leave my house. Like, I don't even want to leave my house. Like, I've made a huge mistake. So that was uncharted waters to navigate through, and I was able to maintain all the relationships that were important to me, but it gave me clarity too. And I think that sometimes these things happen when you stutter with taking the steps that you probably should. I ended up leaving and going to a startup company that was looking for talent from the company that I came from to help them launch their technology. But it was hard. It was, for the first time, I showed people a side of me that they had never seen. Like, the one person had called and he said, like, you don't even sound like Kristy. Like, the tone of my voice was even different, Bill. Like, I was
Yeah.
just like, oh my gosh, how do I get out of this?
So I think that's a good lesson. You talk about wanting to live in a different part of the country, and you were looking at some things as being important enough for you to actually make a change. But when you got there and realized that, oh, wait a second, it's actually none of those things were as important as my values, and maybe that was kind of an aha moment for you. Can you talk a little bit more about that moment of self discovery, maybe what some of those values were that you uncovered in terms of being what's most important to you?
Yeah, great question. And thank you for stopping on this point. This is one that clearly, up until that point in my life, you'd hear it and you're like, oh, whatever. Yeah, values, you just keep
Yeah.
whatever. And then when you live it, it's like that is a big piece of your compass. And so truth and authenticity and respect and appreciation are very fundamental. And those were the things that were being conflicted at the time for me.
Hmm.
So I'm watching people conduct business in ways. So this company had a reputation, and I was like, I couldn't understand why you'd hear some of these stories. Well, now I know where they're coming from. I know the people that are creating them, and now these people I'm reporting into, and this was the culture and the way that they talked about and treated their reps and the teams, and also the clients, and the things that they had promised were just not were a total confliction. Up until this point in my career, we had technology that could save your life, but it could also do the opposite too in the hands of the wrong person. But we got to select who we were giving it to, which was very unique in that world, right? Usually it's like whoever rose their hand, you're very grateful and thankful. So it is the foundation of what I teach in my Unleashed program for women. Is it's a core values exercise, and also how to identify when you've gotten away from those core values, because that's like, I go in these companies and you see the core values on the wall. I'm like, okay, well, how's this operationalized into a daily scorecard? Like, how are you making sure people are living by this? And nobody really is. But as a person, I'm on a mission to help people do that. And so an example of that for me, if I feel anger or frustration, Bill, more than likely I'm in an environment that's conflicting my core values. Those are two
Hmm.
feelings that I know that if I'm around people that I don't trust, if I'm, if something's off there. And so that's the warning light that goes off for me. And I go, okay, all right, hang on a second, Kristy, just hang on a second. And we can take that even, further. And how do you set up in your environment so that you don't end up in those scenarios? And for me, a lot of things hinge on sleep. So if I'm not sleeping good, I'm probably going to make poor decisions that may put me in those environments where my lenses are a little foggy, and I could end up around people or in situations that, I could. That's when I could set down my core values accidentally. So that's why, I reverse things back and go, okay, well, once you have that, well, how do we set up our day and our environment? What should that look like so that you can prioritize the things that make you the best you?
Yeah, so powerful. So let's talk for a second about, because I know this is right in your wheelhouse. Let's talk about self doubt or fear of failure, because you've obviously had a professional employee past life. Now you're coaching others, but you're running a business and going and navigating through all of those things as well with clients and your own personal development personally as a business owner. So how did you manage those things in the past, and how do you manage those things now? And then maybe to take it a step further, how are you coaching others to handle those two very specific things that can be such huge obstacles for anybody trying to reach their best?
Yeah, yeah. So, I grew up in a home like you hear Sarah Blakely's story. I don't know if you've ever heard the founder of Spanx, Jesse
Yep.
is his wife, and she talks about her dad around the dinner table and being like, "Well, what'd you try today?" And you failed, right? And then they
Yeah.
high five, and it's like it just becomes the culture, and it's like it's not a thing. Well, for me, it was like, well, what are people going to think? That was kind of the question that was always, well, what are we going to tell people? What are people going to think? And so that was, I mean, that's in my blood. So that was the biggest hurdle that I had to get over. And also being in that corporate space and the job of instructing and leading teams to instruct in the OR, like absolute, you had to have the absolute answer, and perfection was a thing that you had to have. Like, you can't mess this up. It has to be right, right? So that was probably the biggest hurdle that I had to get over. And it was really plugging into personal development and learning how other people were doing it, because I'm wired to be an employee. I'm not wired to be an entrepreneur. Taking bold action is the cure for everything for me, really, truly. And knowing that I'm not going to sit in my office and figure this out, Bill. I'll figure it out talking to you and talking to a bunch of people like you and plugging into personal development and taking action. But as long as you're moving forward, you're going to figure it out. But you're never going to, wherever you start is not where you're going to land. So the faster that you can get over, and one of the things that helped me, it's funny how all the sales scripts that I would write and put the people through the paces, now it's helpful in this other space too, is
Yeah.
giving people the words. So if I could say, instead of being like, well, this is how I unleashed, Bill, this is how I unleashed this is how I've unleashed until to this point, but there's another level, right? Now that gives me permission for myself to grow and change and develop and to pivot if I want to. So that's been incredibly helpful for me and all of my clients too. Well, I'm on this journey too, Bill, but this is what I've learned and this is what I know to be true. So the moments that I really need to go in and I'm like, dude, he's gonna make a like, don't do this, right? You'll see me coming and I'll bring the fire. But for the most part, if I can create that language for myself, then that gives all the people around me to start to the permission to adopt that too, and to stop being the perfectionist and having the absolute, giving ourselves the opportunity to know that I may learn something new. I probably am. I probably am, and I'm probably going to be speaking about it differently in the future.
Real quick, you said operating room, and I've been in those operating rooms. I've got some history in medical devices as well. It was not for me for so many different reasons, but that's another podcast. But I want you to just take the listeners inside that operating room, just paint the picture for them real quick. All the little details that come with being a sales rep in a foreign environment, but having the pressure to perform in that type of an environment, and how mental toughness is not just a nice to have, it is a requirement.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, like it's funny when I had to like rewind the way that I walk. People will say, you walk into a room like you own it." And I do. And they're like, "How did you learn that?" And I was like, "I don't know. How did I learn that?" And I remember that I'd get off like this. So the elevator doors were open. And now when you're in the part of the hospital where it all looks the same, but now everything's the same. There's nothing on the walls. Everything's white. And you're like, where am I? I got to find my way to the operating room. And there's like 10 in my territory, right? And now if I have a team, now I got 80 to figure out. Well, those operating room nurses are waiting for you, Bill. Okay. And so you're the person who walks in, and although I have the same garb as them, I probably have my eyelashes on, I have lipstick on, and now the surgeon's giving me their attention too. And so she's going to get me if she can. So I would walk off that elevator and I would just walk like I knew where I was going. 90% of the time, I'm going in the wrong direction. So when I find an opportunity to circle back around, I would. Posture is everything. So when it came to the Da Vinci robot, I've already sold the CEO on why you need to spend $2 million. I've spent probably 30 hours of my time practicing in the OR after hours with the surgeon. And now I got to go in and now I'm talking to the anesthesiologist. Well, listen, Mr. Anesthesiologist, we're gonna tip this patient on their head. It's called reverse Trendelenburg, and I want you to run them dry for about maybe 10 hours. What that means is you're not going to give them fluid. So now for the first time, you're going to have to do this procedure with an overweight patient. And now we got them like this, their head's down here and their feet are here. And I ask you to run them dry because we don't need any fluid in the pelvis while we're doing this prostatectomy. So don't give them any fluid, which means they may go blind if you don't do your job right, right? And I laugh. This is not like funny laughter. This is uncomfortable laughter. Sometimes I do that when I'm uncomfortable, and you're taking me back to that moment. So now he is like really not happy, right? Like he is like who is this person? They bought this $3 million. Like what is happening here? So you learn to get ahead of things. You learn how framing and expectations and planning and prep is absolutely everything. So that's one piece of it. So you go through all of that. And now I'm in there and now they got the patient asleep and I'm making sure they have everything positioned right. Now we have to dock this robot to the patient. So now I got to make sure you got the best scrub techs, the best nurses. They have their eyes on me the whole time because even though we train, now they're seeing red because now they have to push the buttons and this arms of this thing are flailing in front of them. And they got to be up there by the sterile field. The person that is usually giving them all of their direction and confidence, I have them in the corner and they have their head buried into this big console. It looks like you're playing a big video game. Everything that the surgeon's doing over there, the patient, it's being mimicked by the robot. Well, now, on top of all of that, before that, I had to make sure they chose an easy case because if you choose we can't learn on hard cases. So now I have to give the surgeon the words to tell the patient why we need to do this really easy case on this robot. They don't know how to do it. So now I have to give them that coaching and that confidence. We flew a proctor in maybe for the first case. After that, the first two cases, it's on me. And I watch these procedures time and time again, but I'm not a doctor. So if now I'm watching the doctor who's seeing the anatomy for the first time in this way, they have 10 10x visualization for the first time, and they're doing a minimally invasive procedure that used to be open. So they're doing a prostatectomy minimally invasively with a camera right there in the prostate. Usually the prostate's kind of they used to call it the rip and tug procedure because it's so low in the pelvis and you can't get in there. So they go in there and they get it out, and what ends up happening and for these poor men afterwards. And now I'm watching this surgeon who thinks that he's sewing two pieces of anatomy together, but he's got the wrong two pieces together, and I can't tell him. We practice, we practice, we practice. He's tired, he's stressed. And so now I got to find ways to say, you know what, Bill, Dr. Bill, now's a really good time. And you learn to prep all of this in advance. There's going to be times I'm going to stop you during the procedure, Bill. I just want you to take a breath. It's going to be a long procedure. We're just going to get our bearings. We're going to look at the anatomy again. It's the first, I know you know anatomy, but I need you to play along with me, right? You find all these ways because now I'm going to need it. And I learned this the hard way. Now I need to tell him, I can't have it on my conscience that he's sewing fat to fat together. That's not urethra on urethra. So like the patient's going to drink water and it's all going to be in their abdomen. So now I got to get you to play my game with me. And I've built that trust through the process. And you're probably a little scared right now too. So you'll do it and you'll pan back and we'll play the game and I'm hoping that he can connect the dots and realize like, whoa, right? I mean, I've had like people walk in the room while the patient is bleeding and the nurse, does this to get the ultrasound machine in with the cords and pulls it out of the wall. And I see like the error message and I'm like, I've never seen that one before. And I'm the person that's spending hours with the engineer at night to make sure I'm prepared for everything. I'm like, dude, I have no idea what that is, but that is not good. And the patient's bleeding right now, and you just have to think on your feet. And I'm wired for that. The more pressure, the more, that's why TV and stages in the moment, and it works very well for me. So that was my life. Like that's a peek into it, and not to mention we could control outcomes. So sometimes the CEO that bought this technology and now other surgeons are happy. And I'm like, he doesn't do enough. I can't make him successful. I'm not training you. So now the surgeon for the first time has a rep or a manager, director, whatever I was at the time, going back to the CEO saying like, well, Kristy said she won't train me. So now the CEO is like, Kristy, I bought $2 million. You're going to train him. And I'm like, well, not unless he gives him his cases and you can get him up to 30, right? Like it was big time. And you can see why traditional medical device companies were like, where are these intuitive surgical people? Because they're doing things, they're controlling this environment and controlling the outcome like nobody else has. So that's a little piece of it. Now to add one more layer to that, in the beginning, well, and it's probably to this day, the sales rep is the support person too. Now they probably have clinical people. So we were running like our competition was on our tail. And how in the world are you going to sell when you're spending 10 hours a day supporting cases in the OR?
Right.
So time management and prioritization and getting ahead of things and getting people trained up was a lot of things that we had to learn and get ahead of.
Yeah, for the listeners, what you just heard Kristy describe, she was running the entire room. She was running the entire show. There's a surgeon in there who went to medical school for 100 years, but the rep and somebody who's as highly skilled as Kristy was is running that entire room with so much pressure on her shoulders. So there's not really a more pressure-packed environment that you have to rely on mental toughness than an operating room. So thanks for sharing that. I hope the listeners got some value out of that. But going forward, and even now, tell me one or two maybe daily habits, and maybe go small, just the littlest, simplest habits that you rely on to build that muscle, that habit of mental toughness as you continue your current journey.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand like when you feel your best. I think everybody who's listening needs to take inventory and go like, well, maybe it's not working out for me, but it is for me. And it's really like the domino where of like 10 other things that are important. I keep my eye on that ball too. Right. So when I work out, then I'm going to always really make sure I have good sleep because I want to perform good, and working out is very important to me. So that is a non-negotiable, making sure that is on my calendar. I think that another thing is hydration. It's like, it'll make or break me, Bill. It is like, it's this new thing like 2 years ago that I've really focused in on. Having salt and water is so critically important. That's another thing that I prioritize. I am, if you can't tell, I'm wound tighter than a drug drum sometimes. And And I like it. I like to be like this, but I have to have a really good routine at night to bring it down. So sometimes the day wears me out, and that's great. And some days aren't like it, I'm not as fired up as I am at this moment. But having a really good nighttime routine, the sauna has been a game changer for me. I live in a full service building. We have a sauna, so I'll go down and do that. And that's where I first started incorporating breathing exercises. That's the part during the day between all the things that if I can tell, if I feel a moment of stress, I turn into breathing exercise. And it just, it's just the simple stuff that you and I know. Just box breathing is incredibly helpful.
Hmm. I love that. It's so simple, and it's all directed at dealing with and taking care of yourself. It's not anything external or, concerned with anybody else, business or otherwise. I
Mhm.
love that. And some of these things are just so simple to do. And it's like anything else. You just got to make them a habit. You got to see the benefit from them and then just put them into your calendar if necessary and just execute and get them done.
Well,
Um, you-
that's a good point that if you don't mind if I say, like,
yeah.
I feel like when people think about high performance and they think about you and I, and it's like they think that like we don't forget, and maybe you don't, but I do. And especially when I'm trying to do something new too. I think I'm on my like eighth or ninth vision board event that I'm teaching for corporate right now. I always do that in January. And I'm like, listen, I have sticky notes up. I have reminders on my phone. I have dingers and whatever. With the best of intentions, I'm going to go back to what we talked about earlier, which is that wiring, that subconscious.
Yeah.
So don't be afraid to put the practice or whatever you need for the reminders. And if you forget, it's okay. Like you can do it again. This is a new hour. It's a new day. Whatever it is, like just that's the people that are really making the progress. They continue to show up.
Yep. Yep. No, I love that. So true. So, just a couple more questions for you, Christy, then I'll let you go. How do you mentioned vulnerability earlier, and Brene Brown is a leader in that space. I just wanted to ask because I'm curious, how do you balance as a leader now showing that vulnerability with also showing the strength necessary as an example to the people that you coach?
Yeah. I had received a compliment that like it just kept coming a couple months ago. I was like doing the speaker workshop in Minnesota, and it was a room full of men. It just is the way that the workshop ended up being. And they said, I've never seen somebody bounce back and forth like masculine and feminine energy in the same, like you do it in the same conversation. Like it's crazy. And the old Christy, like 10 years ago, I was all masculine. I was like, you don't show vulnerability, you don't do that. And the easiest way that I can describe it is I'm just myself. Like if something is emotional enough that I'm gonna cry, I can do that. But it doesn't mean like in the next sentence I'm not gonna get over it and and bring the fire too. Right? So I'm just me. I'm just me. And I'm all those things. I'm going to have the moments where I'm like, man, I really messed up today, or I didn't do good, or I don't feel good, or this thing's really bogging me down. I think most people are emotionally constipated. We don't feel like we can get it out, but it really is a superpower. So it was a journey. It didn't happen overnight. I think that if you're looking to start to be vulnerable for the first time, do it in a place where you feel safe. Because I don't want you like worrying about it, thinking about it, your head to be, what are they thinking? What are they saying? Am I jeopardizing my job? So start to tell those vulnerable things or be vulnerable in places that you can be safe. And then you'll start to be able to do it. That's the beautiful thing about not being in corporate now, Bill. Like I'm just me. So I don't have to be anybody to morph into anything. Now there's times that I'll show you the strength or I'll show you the compassion. I'll do whatever is needed for the moment. But that's all me.
It's too hard to try and wear that mask, isn't it? I mean, it's just too hard to try and be somebody over here and be a different person over there. It's so much easier and it's just such a relief to just be yourself, like you said. So I love that advice. Anybody listening should take it and put it into practice. Again, like everything else we've discussed, it doesn't have to be on a grand scale in front of 100 people at the beginning, but if you start to build a habit of just being yourself and being
Mm.
aware of when you're not being yourself, I think is really important as well. So, last question: as you develop now, as you're going forward, we're at the beginning of a new year. You've got a great business functioning. You've got all these plans, all these goals. What are one or two challenges maybe that you've got it on your list, and you're like, I am going to personally knock these out and practice these myself in my journey for personal development going forward? Is there something that's at the forefront of what you want to work on?
Yeah, yeah, and I think we talked about it a little bit beforehand. Is I believe that when you have the opportunity to influence or to connect with lots of different people, it was really hard for me to get the messaging down of what I do, right? And the same reason, Bill, why people hire me, I'm hiring people, because you can't see the picture frame when you're the pitcher. So it's like, when people like I interviewed somebody, I don't know, it was a local magazine, and they gave me like that, like this introduction. I was like, can I have that? Like talking about myself, and it's easier for somebody else to do it and for somebody else to see also. And I'm at this point in my life right now where there's a lot of people that I can serve, but practicing my own words here, and what lights me up the most, where do I want to spend most of my time, is there another layer where I can get even more aligned so that I have more joy and more fulfillment and more peace. And I know I can, because I'm very in tune, like you are, to my body and how I feel. And sometimes it's like, okay, you feel like you have to say yes to everything, and you don't have to. So whatever it is that you love to do, and the same advice that I'm giving everybody else, I'm looking to see how I can apply that even further in my life. Like, is there, of these three different types of people that I can help, which one lights me up the most?
Hmm.
And I know for certain that I can have success in that one area. I don't have to do all three. I don't have to, serve if I feel like I've outgrown something.
I
But I
love it.
need also, I think true self reflection is when you allow somebody else in too. So reaching out to people that I trust, that I can put it all out there and be like, man, I don't even know if any of these words make sense, but I'm just going to get it out of my mouth and out of my head. And I know that you're not, it's a safe place, and you'll help me sort it out.
Doing that is mental toughness, because a lot of people don't
Yeah,
have courage to ask people those questions. So I love that you said
for
that as
sure.
well. We will end right there. Kristy, this has been awesome. But before we go, I want you to tell the listeners where they can follow you, what you have going on, any way that they can connect with you. I'd love for you to share that with them.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity. At Kristy_Kuhl, I'm sure you'll put this in the show notes,
Yep.
on all the social media platforms. I'm not sure when this airs. We will have the Success Unleashed Summit, which is it's a free opportunity for you to learn new information and get inspired and get into action. That is happening January 21st, and there are opportunities for replays if this launches after that. And if you are a woman who is ready to unleash, I have another group coaching program starting on February 10th. And you can contact me in any of those ways on social media or KristyKuhl.com. If you know that you're meant for more, if you know there's another layer of you that's ready to unleash, and you're ready to get with a group of amazing ladies and walk through these exercises, it's all the same stuff that I put myself through. Please, I would love the opportunity to tell you more about it and see if it's the right fit.
Awesome. Thank you, Kristy. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.